Well, hello there. What's up? How's it going? I recently got a DVD from Amazon that I have had on my wish list for some time now, but didn't have any real reason to run out. Well, I say run out and buy, but what I mean is, I didn't have any real reason to pick it up until now because I am taking a class on New Hollywood cinema, as it were. Um, New Hollywood cinema took place between the late 60s and the early 70s. Stuff like, for instance, um, and this is going to sound like a smorgasbord, but it is 2001 A Space Odyssey could be considered a part of the New Hollywood cinema. Let's see here. The Poseidon Adventure, Easy Rider, um, The Wild Bunch, just a lot of movies that came out around that time. Bonnie and Clyde, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. A lot of movies that came out around that time that really, pushed the boundaries, as it were. The Graduate, yeah, um, what was acceptable in film at the time, because they started to realize that, they can get away with more stuff because the code didn't work anymore, the Hollywood code, as it were, right? So they were testing the boundaries, and the studios were, willing to give them a chance to do that because they didn't know what audiences wanted. All the stuff that they were putting out that they was what they thought audiences wanted were bombing, were not doing well. So they gave filmmakers a little bit more leeway. They said, okay, do whatever the heck you want to, and then bring it back to us. Of course, most of the time, or I don't know if I should say most of the time, but some of the time, they came back to them and they said, this is unacceptable. So they either cut it down uh, for release in theaters, like edited it down, or they basically like kept it out of theaters for the most part and limited any release of it in the future. I mean, they held a grudge about these movies. But anyways, I digress. I'm just leading up to telling you the movie I got. And I got the movie because I need to, I should say, write a paper about any movie that I want to from the New Hollywood cinema era. And it wasn't on any lists, but I knew the second we started talking about this, and the second that we started talking about the directors and everything that were involved with this movement, that it was definitely a part of the New Hollywood cinema movement. And I could think of instantly, I was able to think of several instances in which it was far different from other Hollywood films at the time, and definitely pushed the boundaries quite a bit. And it shows in how the studios responded to it. And that movie is Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Now, I didn't even know about this movie, I'll be quite frank and honest, until last year when I took a westerns course on modern westerns, which, forgive me, I don't remember the term, but modern westerns in this case would be things that started in the 60s and led on into this. And really, when you think about it now that I think about it in context of this class as the New Hollywood class, yeah, the New Hollywood kind of led the way for the new modern westerns that came about. And this is one of those that did it. After the Wild Bunch, there was Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid with Chris Christopherson, James Coburn, as you can see, beautifully painted on there. And I don't know if you can tell one of the names on there, Bob Dylan. Yeah, he actually plays a significant role in this. Of course, I say that what I mean is that he has quite a lot of screen time. He doesn't have too many lines, but the lines that he does have are kind of funny sometimes. Not in that they're intentionally funny, but in that they're kind of unintentionally funny because of the way that he says things, of course. We all love Bob Dylan. Well, I know I do. But yeah, I saw this for the first time, of course, in that Western film class that I was taking in modern Westerns. And I remarked at how awesome it was. But then I also remarked that I hadn't heard of this movie before, and more importantly, one of the songs on the soundtrack caught my ear because I was like, oh my god, oh my god. I did a little bit more studying and realized Bob Dylan wrote the entire soundtrack for this movie. So everything in the movie that's music is something he did for the soundtrack for this movie. And then I began to realize, oh my god, Bob Dylan wrote one of the most famous songs in his fucking repertoire for this movie. And it was buried. And I had no idea, and I know a lot of people my age and even older that had no idea because the film was buried, you know? And that song, in case you were wondering, Knocking on Heaven's Door, which of course has been covered by, I believe, various bands. The one that comes readily to mind is Guns N' Roses. But yeah, Knocking on Heaven's Door came from this movie, as did quite a few other classic and awesome Bob Dylan tracks. Like I said, he wrote the entire soundtrack for this movie, which is kind of what makes it. Well, I wouldn't say what the only thing that makes it, but it's one of the things that makes it, you know, part of the new Hollywood, definable as something as part of the new Hollywood. Because before that, westerns had different soundtracks. Of course, I would say that Ennio Morricone was not what I would say a standard songwriter for um, westerns, although he has kind of come to typify what we think of when we hear a western soundtrack. But you know, he wrote orchestral pieces. He did, you know, he did music that didn't really involve too many lines of dialogue or words or anything like that. You know, uh, I guess there were some words in some of the songs that he wrote. In fact, I know there were, but you know, nothing in the typical songwriting style, especially not in the typical songwriting style of the time. So, in that, you could say that he was a part of the new Hollywood in a way. But yeah, it's this is more following in the style of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which, if you've seen it, features some music from the period that it was made in. So late '60s music, not like what you would think of as late '60s music. It's actually, I think it's "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." Yeah, that song is played while they're riding a bicycle, I believe it is, for the first time in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a western, which is a little strange if you really think about it compared to other westerns and, well, compared to all the original style of westerns that they used to do before the 1960s, you know? And that's not to say that there weren't any more modern westerns uh, before the 1960s, but they really became what they were, I would argue, in the 60s. This came out in '73, a few years, I believe, after Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And like I said, the entire soundtrack done by Bob Dylan. And in the typical Bob Dylan style for the era, I mean, you wouldn't think it would work so well with these, with a western like this. But his folksy music really does fit in almost perfectly. I mean, it's kind of awkward at first, but then it grows on you, and then you realize how brilliant it is. So yeah, I mean, and that was different. That was fairly different for a Western at the time to be doing something like that, especially to be getting a whole soundtrack done by somebody like Bob Dylan, you know. Uh, Sam Peckinpah directed this. Peckinpah, known for The Wild Bunch and a bunch of other um, odd, well, I wouldn't say odd, but, you know, different westerns. My good buddy Brandon Skinslip said something to the effect that there's three things you can count on in a Peckinpah movie, and I believe two of the things that he mentioned were that the idea of a old law, or actually I think all three of them were the old law, um, the old outlaw coming in and taking the law into his own hands, sanctioned by, you know, the East, by the railroad often. And you can also count on the new, younger outlaw, which would be Billy the Kid in this case, who is, you know, taking the place of the old outlaw, I guess. I'm sure he's going to see this movie and, like, correct me because I know that I'm kind of completely trampling his words. But yeah, you can expect those types of things. And titties, gratuitous nudity. That was one of the things. But I would argue there's also, like, there's a certain treatment of life in these films that is pretty out there. In The Wild Bunch, in the opening scene, you see a bunch of kids playing with scorpions and ants. So there's all these ants, and they're putting the scorpions on top, trying to kill the ants, just trying to cause havoc in the world of these little animals. And then eventually, I believe they actually set fire to, like, all of them, and they're laughing and having a good time about it. You know, it's really disturbing, which is why when you see a scene in this film where there are kids literally swinging on the gallows where Billy the Kid is about to be hanged, my good friend Eric, while watching it, remarked that that was disturbing. Yeah, there's something about, like, the kids in his movies always seem to have some kind of a scene where they're doing something really disturbing related to death. So, you know, there's all that, the aspect of death, the aspect of, like, new law and outlaw, and the aspect of titties. I hate to say it, but it's true. There's a lot of gratuitous nudity in this movie, which is kind of one of the reasons why it was buried. I mean, they did a really shitty edit of the movie and released it in the theaters, and it got really bad reviews because it was a shitty edit of the movie. And then years later, it was either 1988 or 1998, that they finally released the movie proper. And this DVD was released in 2005 at the end of the era of the DVD, you know. Like a lot of the films of this time and this era, it has not been given a lot of respect, and it's like the studios still hold a grudge against it, and they still don't want anybody to see it, honestly. A notorious one for that would be Medium Cool, which is an incredibly important political film from the 60s, 1969 actually, which they actually shot part of the film, which was a film. It wasn't a documentary per se. I guess you could say it's sort of, in a small way, a mockumentary, but it really is a fictional film, basically. But even in this fictional film, they were shooting scenes in the fictional film during a riot, an actual riot that was taking place. So, you know, that scenes from that riot are historically preserved in this fictional film, which is like something that had not really been messed around with in the United States very much before that, if at all. So it was a very experimental era, of course, but that's what really gets me about it is that all these movies that were so experimental, so important to the history of American cinema, that kind of led to some of the great stuff that we see now, are still being shunned by the studios because the studios, for whatever reason, still hold a grudge. Look at Easy Rider, even though uh, Dennis Hopper recently passed away by the most horrible of means. Even though they should be paying respect to him and making it easy for his fans to find one of the most important films of the era, one of probably his crowning achievement, some would say. Still yet, they've taken those Blu-rays off the shelves, and it is now collecting. It is now fetching collectors' prices because, and I firmly believe, it's because they still kind of hold this grudge because it isn't the kind of films that they wanted made. It had too much violence, too much nudity. It poo-pooed the code. So, because it poo-pooed the code, they're gonna poo-poo on them. Or I don't know. It's really strange because these films are really culturally significant, and yet they aren't given the treatment they deserve. That's why I picked this up on DVD. Not only because I wanted to watch it again before I started writing about it, but because I knew, since it was released at the end of the DVD era, if we ever see it on Blu-ray, it'll be at the end of the era of the Blu-rays. If, and I highly doubt they would even do that. I mean, maybe they would, but there is a history with this film being shunned by the studios. So, yeah, but regardless of the gratuitous nudity, there is just the violence in this film. It comes seemingly from out of nowhere, and I like that. And again, I would refer back to Drive for something like that because in Drive, of course, you see it's not an. It's supposed to be an action movie, right? And it is an action movie, but it's kind of what people would consider a slow action movie because the action doesn't. There isn't a lot of the action. But when the action takes place, it is graphic. It is startlingly graphic. And for the time, the action scenes in this film were also startlingly graphic. In one scene, I can remember thinking to myself that looked extremely realistic, even though it wasn't realistic at all. It was when a bullet actually appears to go through a body. But it wasn't an actual bullet. It was just, movie magic, as it were. But yeah, I mean, the musical score, the violence, the nudity, the editing too. The disturbing scenes with the kids, but I mean, the editing was kind of off. Like, there's a scene in the very beginning where they kind of cut between an era. They cut between a scene in 1909 and a scene in like 1889 or something like that. Like, just randomly out of nowhere with no explanation or anything. One of the characters gets shot at, ambushed, as it were. And I won't tell you any more than that, but when he is shot at, it cuts to a scene where one of the other characters is shooting at a bunch of chickens, and you literally see the chickens' heads fucking explode off of their body. It's graphic, it's disturbing, it's intentional. It is an amazing movie. I really had fun watching it again. I'm glad to have it in my collection, and shame on all of the studios. Shame on all of you who are trying to make it difficult for Americans to learn about one of the most important pieces of their cinematic history, and for them to know about this important piece of their history. Shame on you. That is it's absolutely sickening. There's no reason. There is no reason. the time has come and gone to hold grudges for this. Because you know what? These films went on to make you lots of money. They went on to become important historical pieces for their time. And they went on to inspire a new young generation of filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith, Robert Rodriguez, who were able to do similar things and really create a new era, I would argue, of Hollywood cinema that we might not have seen otherwise. So, just shame on you. That's all I can say. But, yeah, it should be interesting writing about this because my first paper is supposed to be 5 pages on a film that I think is a part of the new Hollywood and why I think it's a part of the new Hollywood. What would make it a part of the new Hollywood from what I see, right? And then the second paper is supposed to be an exploration of research that would prove the point or something along those lines. So it's like everything that I just talked to you about is going to go in that paper because it's stuff you can see and hear and tell visually that's definitely a part of it. So yeah, if you have not seen Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, you should know that this DVD edition is going on Amazon for about, I got it for $7.69. It's going for about there's another copy for $7.69 as well, but I don't know if there's any more for around that price that are new or in good condition. So, yeah. I don't know how much longer it's going to be that price, but if you want to get it, you should get it while you can. So, yeah, that's about all I had to say about this, and I did want to go into detail about it, which is why this video is so long, even though it's literally just a DVD update for one DVD. Not all my DVD updates are this long, but I had a lot to say about this one, so I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope you'll, if you haven't heard of this or seen it yet, check it out. I mean, I'm sure there are a few things that have piqued the interest of at least some of you, if not all of you, because, I mean, some of you are going to be like, oh my God, Bob Dylan did the whole soundtrack, and one of them was that famous song. And then some of you are going to be like, oh my God, it's a Sam Peckinpah movie I haven't seen. Others are going to be like, oh my God, he said titties. You know, there's a bunch of stuff that would appeal to a lot of different people. So I'm hopeful that I can help spread the word about this movie that I didn't even know about until a year ago. That'll do her. Thanks for watching, and I want to let you know that I will be doing another DVD update, or Blu-ray update, I should say, fairly soon, because I plan tomorrow to go to Best Buy and take advantage of their upgrade and save event. I've got like 9 DVDs set out so that I can get tons of Blu-rays because I just came into some money, so I'm like, I'm going to spend some of that on some frickin' Blu-rays that I really want, since they're at a really good price. Unbeatable on some of these. $5. You bring the DVD in, you get $5 off the Blu-ray, any Blu-ray in the store. And there are a lot of $9.99 titles, so it's like bringing it down to $4.99 basically. Some of these have never been that low a price anywhere ever. So, yeah, keep that in mind if the sale is still going on when I post that video, or post this video, I should say. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for watching. Catch you later. Peace.